They were called the Fukuryu, the crouching dragons, steel coffins, barely larger than torpedoes, designed to glide beneath the waves and die. But this wasn't the story of a battlefield suicide charge in the waters off Okinawa or Iwo Jima. This was something darker, more desperate, and almost entirely forgotten. In the final crumbling days of World War II, Japan crafted one last plan. A terrifying, top-secret mission unlike any other. It was called Operation Cherry Blossoms at Night. The goal? Deliver death to the United States, not through bombs, not through bullets, but with plague. And the delivery system wasn't a plane or a missile. It was a small fleet of manned submarines, each carrying a pilot with no expectation of return, set to unleash biological weapons on American cities. Except, they never arrived. They vanished. No trace, no splash, not even a radio transmission. To this day, no one knows exactly what happened to Japan's suicide submarines, but their existence and their horrifying mission was very, very real. The roots of Operation Cherry Blossoms began not with the Navy, but with a doctor. His name was Shiro Ishii, brilliant, ambitious, and monstrous. In the 1930s, Ishii was the driving force behind Unit 731, an infamous biological warfare division hidden deep in Japanese-occupied Manchuria. There, under the pretense of medical research, Japanese scientists performed some of the most gruesome human experiments of the 20th century. Prisoners, mostly Chinese civilians, were exposed to anthrax, cholera, plague, typhoid, and more. Some were vivisected alive. Others were subjected to frostbite, forced rape, or used as test subjects for flamethrowers and grenades, all in the name of science and war. By the early 1940s, Ishii had developed a reliable means of spreading the bubonic plague using infected fleas. He tested them in controlled environments and on living prisoners. But the real plan was much bigger. He wanted to weaponize disease on a national scale, and the Emperor's military high command gave him the green light. By 1944, Japan was losing the war. Cities were burning, resources were scarce, and the American advance in the Pacific was closing in from every direction. But desperation breeds dangerous ideas. Ishii proposed a new plan. Use long-range submarines to deliver biological weapons directly to the U.S. mainland. Not bombs, not sabotage, plague. The project was codenamed Operation Cherry Blossoms at Night. The target was clear: Southern California. The means of delivery: I-400 class submarines, some of the largest submarines built during the war. The I-400 class was no ordinary submarine. It was 400 feet long, more like a submerged aircraft carrier than a traditional U-boat. Each one could carry 3 Aichi M6A1 Siren floatplanes, hidden in a watertight hangar on the deck. Once surfaced, the crew could assemble and launch the planes in minutes. These weren't bombers, per se. They were designed for surprise attacks. Low altitude, low profile, high-risk missions. The idea behind Operation Cherry Blossoms was chilling in its simplicity. Fly these planes over the American West Coast and drop ceramic bombs filled with plague-infected fleas. Those fleas, once released, would spread through the population. The plague would mimic natural outbreaks. But the scale would be monstrous. The mission, from the start, was one way. Pilots would not return. Submarine crews were to flee or scuttle their vessels after the drops. Everyone involved was expected to die. In early 1945, the plan was approved in secret. 5 I-400 class submarines would be outfitted for the mission. Launch date: September 22, 1945, the symbolic anniversary of Japan's victory over Qing China 50 years earlier. Ishii and his scientists prepared the plague bombs. Submarine crews trained for long-range navigation. Pilots were selected, men willing to sacrifice themselves for the Emperor. But then something changed. In August 1945, the U.S. dropped atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Within days, Japan surrendered. Operation Cherry Blossoms was never carried out. At least, that's what the official records say. But there's more to the story. At least two I-400 class submarines disappeared before the surrender. The I-400 and I-401 were both captured by the U.S. Navy shortly after the war ended. But there were others, less documented, less accounted for. Some historians believe that at least one submarine left port before the surrender, possibly unaware that the mission had been aborted. Others believe the crews may have scuttled their submarines in open water to avoid capture, or to prevent their payloads from falling into enemy hands. There were even reports, uncorroborated but persistent, of strange illnesses in coastal areas of South America around the end of the war. Plague-like symptoms, clusters of infections, unexplained deaths. No direct evidence has ever tied those outbreaks to Japanese submarines. But then again, no wreckage from those subs was ever found either. In the years after the war, the United States quietly interrogated members of Unit 731. Instead of trying Shiro Ishii for war crimes, U.S. intelligence offered him immunity in exchange for his research. The data from Japan's biological warfare program was considered too valuable to destroy. Ishii lived out his life in relative peace. He died of throat cancer in 1959, never tried, never imprisoned. His plague bombs were never used, but they were built. And the submarines meant to carry them? Some made it back, some were captured. But at least one, maybe more, simply vanished. Today, the story of Operation Cherry Blossoms is still largely unknown. It was buried beneath the greater horrors of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, forgotten in the shadow of firebombed cities and atomic ruins. But it remains one of the most chilling what-ifs of World War II. Not because it failed, but because it almost didn't. It came within weeks of launching, and had the war dragged on even a little longer, the United States might have been struck not by bombs, but by rats and fleas and plague, delivered silently and on steel coffins riding beneath the waves. The I-400 and I-401 were later sunk by the U.S. Navy in deep waters near Hawaii. Not out of necessity, but secrecy. The Cold War had begun, and America didn't want the Soviets getting their hands on the technology. The crews were interrogated, but the full scope of Operation Cherry Blossoms was never publicly released. Not until decades later, when classified documents were declassified. By then, the world had moved on. The atomic bomb defined the ending of World War II. But in a darker timeline, it could have ended with plague, unseen, unheard, and just as deadly. Operation Cherry Blossoms was the last gasp of a crumbling empire, a final, desperate attempt to hurt the enemy at any cost, even if it meant releasing one of the deadliest diseases in human history on civilians. It was evil, but it was real, and it came far too close. Thank you for listening to the Sunken Ledger. Subscribe for more true stories from the depths.